After owning 3 pairs of Fatshark goggles, I have come to the conclusion that it is not possible for another person other than yourself to tell you whether you should get a pair or not. Let me explain why. My first pair of Fatsharks were the Dominator V2s, and I was very critical of them. But I think it's fair to be more critical of a premium product because we are paying a lot more for them than, say, a $15 toy grade product, where the expectation is much lower. Therefore, it's hard to be more critical of it. So, when I tried the V2s, I felt really disappointed, and that is because before owning a pair of Fatsharks, I had a pair of the cheap Quantum goggles, which cost something like £60, including the video receiver and battery, etc. And it was my expectation when spending £400 on the Fatsharks and video receiver module that I would at least get the same, if not better, view from the Fatsharks, and that wasn't the case. In comparison, the image looked like the size of a postage stamp, with a field of view of about 30 degrees compared to the visors, which give about a 70-degree field of view, if not bigger. That being said, I have since realised that a large field of view is not possible with compact goggles like the Fatsharks. You see, a visor is just a relatively small flat monitor repurposed out of an in-car entertainment system with a magnified lens in front of it. Whereas Fatsharks use 2 tiny independent LCD screens that have been magnified using optics, which effectively make your eyes focus far into the distance, at each screen effectively giving a 3D image. And this is why Fatsharks can offer 3D input unlike visor goggles. However, it means that there is a limitation to how big the screen can be at this size. It is also the reason for my next disappointment with them, which is if you are short-sighted, you need diopters to see the image, as it's so far in the distance your eyes will see a blurred image without them, and that was an extra expense with these original goggles. So buying Fatsharks is a compromise which for the RC channel I take. They are lightweight, compact, and with the built-in DVR that works well, it's hard to put a price on them. Well, you can, it was about £400, but there you go. There were some issues with the DVR too. If you were recording and disconnected the battery, you would lose your footage. Also, the original V2s had firmware on them that booted up the DVR in a particular format. My goggles booted up in NTSC if they didn't detect a initial signal, so when you then switched your PAL quadcopter on, the DVR would record massive lines across the bottom of the image, rendering it no good for my reviews. Of course, the workaround then was to turn your gear on first, and then the goggles, which would then detect the correct format. Anyway, I digress because after a couple of generations of their HD range of goggles, I purchased the HD2s. They had fixed these DVR issues by adding a supercap, so when you disconnected the battery, the DVR recognized the drop in voltage and saved the file it was currently recording using the power stored in the capacitor before switching off the goggles. They also added a field of view of 50 degrees, which is still not on par with the video visors, but much bigger than my original V2s, so I went for them. And again, I was disappointed because this time the image was blurred with -2 diopters installed, rendering the text from my on-screen display unreadable, and in general making FPV an unpleasant experience. My opinion at the time was that they had stretched the capabilities of the optics with these goggles. When I made a video review of them, I got some unusual responses in the comments. 60% of people agree with me and 40% said, "What are you talking about? The image is perfect, don't listen to this guy." Regardless of my issues with the HD2s, they did have a defect with them. One of the LCDs were faulty, having a different brightness to the other, so I sent them back and they were returned fixed to me. So I gave them to a friend and continued using my original SD V2s. So when I heard they were releasing a third version with a slightly lower field of view of about 42 degrees or so, I thought that that was a good idea and I got some info review. I looked through them with my -2 diopters to match my bad eyesight, and the image was even more blurred than the HD2s. This left me totally puzzled because when I now compare the field of view to my original V2s, it's actually hardly any bigger, and I will stick a camera in the eyepiece shortly to show you the differences. Before I go any further, I will say that Fatshark have issued a statement regarding this because they have come out to say that a batch of the HD3s were sent out with lens alignment issues, causing blurriness to be on the image. I will overlay that message here. So it's possible that I have a pair of those, and I am currently deciding what to do with my pair, and I will update you once Fatshark have come up with a solution. But I want to discuss why I can look through a pair of Fatsharks, specifically the HD2s, and see a blurred image when someone else can look through them and see a perfect image. And it's because our faces are all different. Everyone's eyes are slightly further apart or closer together than the next person, and in my case, my eyes are aligned like someone was playing a cruel game of pin the eyes on the human. They are not level either, so the narrower field of view can compensate for that, but when the optics are pushed to the extreme edge of the lenses, the sweet spot for a perfect image is much more narrow. So if your eye alignment sits in that sweet spot, then you lucked out. If not, then you will tell people that Fatsharks are a rip-off like I did. Fatsharks have something called IPD adjustment, but they only compensate for distance apart and not wonky eyes like mine. So I'm not confident that even fixing these pair of HD3s will cure my bad eyesight. Maybe some vertical IPDs might be Fatshark's next big winner. So I go back to my original statement, should you get these, and I say, try them first if you can. If you are lucky enough to know a friend who has them, ask if you can check them out, because for me personally, I don't live within 50 miles of a shop that stocks them or have a friend that have some. And for me, I guess again I will be sticking with the V2s. Luckily, Fatshark made a small run of upgraded DVRs for the V2s, which only cost $30 or so. I sent my goggles to Fatshark under warranty when an LCD driver failed, and they fitted it for free. So I have the DVR out of the HD2s in my old SD V2, so I'm quite lucky in that sense. So, regardless of the image, when it comes to the HD3s, I will say this. The only difference between them and the HD2s is the field of view, which is now 42 degrees or so instead of 50 degrees. The HDMI input has been switched to allow a 16:9 aspect ratio, which most HDMI outputs produce anyways. Everything else is the same as far as I can tell. The DVR records at 12 megabit with a resolution of 640 by 480. The improvements that I personally would like to see would be the option to switch between 16:9 and 4:3 in analog mode. We have 16:9 FPV cameras now, and if a £40 monitor can switch between them, then a £400 set of Fatshark should, in my opinion. Also, the HD3s are in their 3rd generation now, and they are still not HD. The screens are 800 by 600, and I believe if a HD TV was in its 3rd generation at that resolution, no one would buy it. Saying that though, TVs are in everyone's homes and Fatsharks aren't, so I understand the development is understandably slower. I'd like to see an increased bitrate and resolution on the DVR as well. My original SD DVR would record in 720 by 480, which did give an incorrect aspect ratio, but was slightly higher resolution than what we have now in these HD models, so I think improvement is needed. I think they should at least match the resolution of the goggles at 800 by 600. So here is a comparison of all of the different screen sizes taken with a Mobius camera pointed in the eyepiece. Ignore the color quality of the image as the Mobius can't capture that. You can see if I get the Mobius in the sweet spot, there is no blurring. You can do this with each individual eye as well, but for me, not both at the same time. I noticed that the original V2s have more of the FPV camera in shot than the HDs, which seem to have cropped the image somewhat. I'll leave a link in the description if you wish to get a pair. I have always got my Fatsharks from Banggood or GearBest, as their customer service has always allowed me to return them, so I suggest that you do that as well if you don't have a friend or a shop that you can visit. So as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.